Hello, today we're going to be looking at running an upgrade from CDH 5.16 to the latest version of CDP Private Cloud Base. As part of this upgrade, we're going to be upgrading Cloudera Manager, and we're going to be upgrading the cluster itself. Now, before we go any further, we need to make sure we've checked a few things. First of all, we need to review the supported upgrade paths. When upgrading from CDH, at the moment we can only go from CDH 5. CDH 6 will be coming in the next release of CDP. We also want to check the requirements and supported versions before we go, so making sure that we've got the correct operating systems, supported RDBMS for the backend databases, and the correct JDK installed on all of the hosts. There'll be some things we need to do before we run the upgrade. These include moving from MapReduce 1 to MapReduce 2. We're going to be moving from Apache Sentry to Apache Ranger, although we will handle that as part of the upgrade process itself. We'll be moving from Apache Hive 1.2 to Apache Hive 3, and we'll upgrade Apache HBase from 1.2 to 2. We'll also be removing Apache Pig and Apache Flume. Okay, so on the cluster we've got here, I've already upgraded the JDK. The operating system is running CentOS 7. Backend databases are running MySQL 10.2. So from a prerequisites perspective, we're ready to go. The first thing we need to do is to upgrade Cloudera Manager. Now the process of upgrading Cloudera Manager looks like this. The first thing we recommend doing is taking a backup of Cloudera Manager. So to do that, we're going to back up the RDBMS. We're also going to back up any of the disk locations that are used by the Cloudera management services as well. The next phase we can do without taking outage of the cluster, so we can upgrade Cloudera Manager without stopping any of the cluster services and without having an impact to users. We're going to upgrade the Cloudera Manager server, and we're going to upgrade the Cloudera Manager agents. And to do this, we're going to use the OS Package Management System YUM. We need to update the YUM repository. So this is creating a new YUM repo file and copying that onto all the hosts. I'm going to use Ansible to copy the files across just to make life a little easier. Before we run the YUM upgrade command, we need to shut down the Cloudera Manager agents and then the Cloudera Manager server process itself. We need to shut down the agents on all hosts, so I'm going to do this using Ansible ad hoc commands, just to mean I don't need to log into every host and do those one by one. Now we can shut down the Cloudera Manager server. Now that the processes are stopped, we can run the YUM upgrade statement. And again, I'm going to run this on all hosts using Ansible. This is going to take a little while, so we're going to fast forward that just in the interest of time. Okay, so it looks like that upgrade is completed, and now we're going to restart the Cloudera Manager server, and we'll restart the Cloudera Manager agents. And we'll just pause while the Cloudera Manager server comes back up, and it'll take a few minutes. Once the Cloudera Manager server is back up, we're just going to wait for the agents to heartbeat in. In fact, they should be heartbeating in already, so we can see that the upgrade is complete. Let's have a look at it. Okay, so it looks like the agents are all checking in. We can run the host inspector, and let's look to see what comes back from that. Okay, that's all come back green, and it looks like Cloudera management services are up as well. When we look at the cluster, we can see we've got a lot of warnings here. This is because we haven't yet restarted the Cloudera management services, so let's do that. We can make this go a bit faster. And once that's done, we'll just wait for the service monitors to come back up with the cluster to start heartbeating again. On this version, there's an issue where we're seeing that yarn hasn't yet come back as green, and that's because of the version of the Cloudera management services that we're running. We can actually ignore this error if we want to, but I'm going to run a cluster restart now in the background. But we can now move on to the next step, which is to upgrade the cluster itself. The first thing we would do as part of upgrading the cluster itself is to add in the new parcel repo locations. Once we've done this, we'll let the parcels download. And this is a parcel that's going to look very similar to a CDH parcel, and in fact it's actually numbered CDH 7. Click the download button and we'll wait for that download. It's going to take a few minutes. Okay, that's done. That's downloaded. Now we can distribute those parcels to the hosts. We'll just let that finish distributing, and then we can click the upgrade button. Okay, so this is the upgrade wizard. Let's take a look at this. So the first thing we see is that we've got a configuration check warning, and this is to do with having Spark 2 and Spark 1 on this cluster. What we're going to do is we're just going to go into the Spark 2 service. We're going to hunt down the alternative setting and just change that so it's not got the same alternatives as the Spark 1 service. Okay, let's go back to the upgrade wizard and we'll rerun those checks again. Okay, those checks have all come back green, and now we can check the button to let Cloudera Manager activate the new parcels. Okay, next we've got a handful of services we need to add to the cluster. First of all is going to be Tls, which is used by Hive 3. Tls doesn't actually need any configuration, it's just going to be running on all hosts. So we'll just accept the defaults and move on with that. Next is the Hive on Tls service. So the Tls engine is going to replace MapReduce and/or Spark for running Hive queries in CDP. The Hive on Tls service is just going to run Hive Server 2, so we're going to choose which host we want to run Hive Server 2 on. There's no configuration required at this stage. We'll add some extra settings in on a page in a moment. If we don't have a Solar service already, we're going to need to add one in, and the Solar service is going to be used by Ranger and potentially Atlas as well. So we're going to choose a server for the Solar server. I'm now going to change some of the configuration defaults on this just to make it clear that this is a Solar service is being used for Ranger. So we're going to use the term Solar Infra for this. I'm also going to change the ports as well, just to make sure we don't get any clashes if I want to add a Solar service back in later on. I'm going to enable TLS and SSL. And that's Solar complete. We can see this has actually thrown up some configuration checks, and we'll come back to these later on. The Yarn Queue Manager service is new in CDP, and it gives you a much better way of managing queues. We do need to migrate our Fair Scheduler configuration into Capacity Scheduler for use in CDP. There's a command line utility we can use for this. First, I'm going to download the Fair Scheduler XML and the Yarn Site XML. I'm going to need to upload those onto one of my cluster hosts so I can run the Fair Scheduler to Capacity Scheduler migration tool FS to CS. The UI gives me all the commands I need to run on the hosts, so they're quite straightforward. Once this is completed, we can see that it's created a file. We can then FTP that back onto my laptop and then reload that back into Cloudera Manager. Let's upload that file now. We need to choose a host to run the Yarn Queue Manager service on. I'm just going to use the master node here. And there's some configuration settings for this as well. And this is going to include setting up the TLS Keystores and trust stores for this application. Because this cluster already had TLS on it, these locations are already in place. So all I need to do is put the locations that I've been using for other services into here. Okay, that's the Yarn Queue Manager done. Next, we need to add the Ranger service. So Ranger is going to replace Apache Sentry in this cluster. We need 3 hosts to run some of the Ranger roles. The first is the Ranger admin. Again, I'm going to run that on a master. And in fact, user sync and tag sync, I'm also going to run on the same master node. We need to have a database set up for Ranger. This is where it's going to store all its policies. So I've created one in the background here on my MySQL server. We can just test the connection to that. It's worth highlighting here that Ranger has some very specific settings that need to be set on the MySQL server, so please do check these before you proceed. Okay, that's good to go. We've got some settings here that we need to set up. One of them is going to be the Ranger admin user password. You can change this after you've installed Ranger. This particular MySQL server doesn't have SSL or TLS enabled, but we are now going to need to set up the Keystores and trust stores for the Ranger service, again using similar values to the ones I just used for the Yarn Queue Manager. You may wish to pay attention to this keystore file alias setting here. This would normally default to the FQTN of the host, but if you were using an unqualified domain name, which some people do, you can change this here. Some more TLS settings here. Okay, and that's Ranger done. Now we could proceed at this point, but on this cluster we're going to install Atlas as well. Atlas is actually going to use HBase, Solr, and Kafka behind the scenes as well. So we'll need to add those services if they're not there already. Let's start by adding Kafka. Kafka is dependent on Zookeeper, but we're also going to make Kafka dependent on Solr, HDFS, and Ranger as well. We'll select some hosts for Kafka to run on. Because this is just a small cluster, I'm just going to run it on one host, but for large production clusters, you may wish to have more hosts for running Kafka. And we can set some of the Kafka initial settings here. Again, we'll want to set up the TLS settings. On this host, you can see the auto configurer has actually set my heap smaller than I wanted, so I'm just going to increase that. We're not using Kafka Connect. And here come the TLS settings. We'll just get these populated now. Okay, that's Kafka done. And now we can add Atlas itself. We'll choose the Atlas server. Again, I'm going to use my master node here, but again, you may wish to spread those out. And here we can look at migrating our lineage data from Navigator into Atlas. Now this is going to be a similar process. We're going to need to run some commands, and it's going to tell us which host we need to run those on now. All the commands you need are actually in this window, so it should just be a matter of copying and pasting them across. And what this is going to do is we're going to first of all extract the lineage data out of Navigator. It's going to write this to a JSON file. We then run that through a converter and then put that in a location where Atlas knows where it is. At that point, we'll then configure Atlas to pick that file up when it first starts and to run the process in the background. Depending on the size of your lineage data, that could take a while, but it will run asynchronously. It's not going to stop the cluster upgrade. We've got some initial settings we need to set up for Atlas, including the admin password, and there's going to be the same TLS settings that we need to do. Okay, so there we have it. We've added all the services that we need to add in. Now we need to go through the final checks before we do the upgrade. There's a number of tasks listed here, and it's really worth reading these in detail. The first is we need to acknowledge that if we're using Cloudera Replication Manager, formerly known as Backup and Disaster Recovery, we need to make sure that the peer cluster is on 5.14 or higher for replication to work after the upgrade. The next is to look at the TLS settings, and we saw that configuration warning earlier on. There's some extra TLS settings that we need to make at this point, so it's worth going to this TLS settings page and making sure that all the keystores, trust stores, and passwords are all set on all of the services. And in fact, you can see as we scroll down, there are a few that are not populated, and that's the source of these configuration warnings. The other checks we've got here are around some H-based limitations around prefix tree data block encoding. We got some notes around the semantics for behavior changes in Hive. And we also need to run the Sentry to Ranger export process. This will actually be an automated step in future releases of the product. Let's do that now. So just in a different window, we'll go across to Apache Sentry service. We can then click the Export Sentry Permissions command. This is going to download the Sentry permissions as JSON and write them into HDFS, where Ranger can then pick them up on its first run. Okay, that's done. We can mark that as complete. We need to note that Spark 1 applications won't run after the upgrade. We'll run the host inspector just to make sure that all of the hosts are in good health before we run the upgrade. And we can run the service inspector as well. We'll just review the host inspector results. Okay, everything's looking green there. We'll run the service inspector. It's best not to do that at the same time as the host inspector. Okay, looks like everything's come back green. Let's just take a quick look at that. We've done our database backups, and so now we're ready to go. Let's click the Continue button and do the upgrade. The upgrade is going to result in a full outage of the cluster, so the first thing that's going to happen is the cluster is going to shut down. Let's go ahead and do this. Okay, the cluster is shut down. It's going to activate the parcels and they're going to start the cluster back up again. Now this is going to take a little while, so we'll fast forward the video and see what we got to at the end. Okay, the upgrade is complete. Excellent, let's take a look at our cluster. Happily, it seems to be looking in good health. There's a few configuration warnings which we can take a look at. We can see we've got some stale configuration on the Cloudera management services, and this may be a cause of some of these warnings. So we'll just refresh the Cloudera management services now. And with that done, I can now start logging into some of my services and checking that everything's there. So I'm going to log into Hive and I'm going to log into Impala and just run some queries to make sure everything's looking okay. Here's a Hive query. It's actually come back remarkably quickly, so that's pretty good. Now when we run a count, you can see it's actually going to give us a lot more detail than we got previously. So this is because it's running in Tls. Subsequent queries once the Tls environment is running are going to be much quicker than we would have seen previously on Hive or MapReduce. Impala also seems to be running okay. It's worth taking a look here at what's happened to the Impala tables when they've been migrated across. You can see here that this table, which was previously a managed table, is now marked as an external table with this property external.table.purge set to true. Behaviorally, this will be exactly the same as the table that we had previously, but it is a semantic difference that you need to be aware of. And we can see exactly the same from the Hive side of things as well. Next, I'm going to run a quick Spark job just to make sure that the cluster is working okay. The Spark Pi job is ideal for running something very simple. Okay, that looks like it's finished okay, and I'll just check the logs to make sure that it did actually find a result. And there we go. Okay, so let's have a little look around our upgraded cluster. Here we've got the Yarn Queue Manager. This is a new component for managing queues in Yarn. You can see we get a nice graphical view of the queue hierarchy. On the right here we have a dynamic queue that's been created for my user when he submitted his Spark job. Okay, so let's take a look at Apache Ranger. Remember, Apache Ranger has replaced Sentry in CDP. When we log into Ranger, we can see that we've got different policies for different areas of the stack. Let's click into the Hadoop SQL policies to look at the policies that apply to Hive and Impala. We can see here at the bottom, here is a policy that's been migrated from Sentry. And it's actually migrated the roles that have come across and the permissions. Ranger is also responsible for audits. So we go to the Audits tab here. We can search and see if we can find the queries that I ran just a moment ago. So here's some of the events from the Spark query that we wrote. And here are the Impala queries. And here's one of the queries that we ran in Hive. If we log into Ranger with a user who has the key admin role, we'll be able to see the KMS policies that have been migrated across from Navigator KMS. If we click into this one, we can see that this is a policy that's been migrated across. Okay, let's have a look at Apache Atlas. Apache Atlas is replacing Cloudera and Navigator as our metadata and governance tool in CDP. I've logged into Apache Atlas here with my LDAP credentials. I'm going to run a search here for my table that I've called Galaxies. This is one that I created when the cluster was still on CDH. You can see it's found that here. Let's have a look at that. So it's got all of the columns in it. And if we click through to lineage, we will be able to see that actually that Galaxies table was then used to create two other tables via an Impala query. Let's have a look at that Impala query. So you can see here there's an insert statement, and again, this is all lineage that's been migrated from Cloudera and Navigator as part of the upgrade process. Okay, and there we go. So let's review what we've done. We've talked through the prerequisites. We've upgraded Cloudera Manager. We've upgraded the cluster itself. And we've been through and we've looked at some of the new features of CDP. Next, I'd encourage you to go to my.cloudera.com to take a look at our CDP Upgrade Knowledgehub. On here, you've got the CDP Upgrade Guide, you've got the CDP Test Drive capability, and the customized Upgrade Advisor. In the Upgrade Guide, you're going to find all of the documentation relating to doing upgrades and migrations. If you wish to test drive CDP Public Cloud, you can sign up here. And the CDP Upgrade Advisor has customized upgrade advice based on your own cluster data. CDP Private Cloud Base 7.1.6 is available now, and that includes rollback support if you need to roll back from either CDH or HDP. There's articles and data about moving from CDH and HDP onto CDP. Do take a look at our CDP training offerings and also have a look at how we can help you through Cloudera Professional Services on your upgrade and migration journey. And some video tutorials that you can have a look at.